I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the Vietnam Veterans News Podcast. News of interest about Vietnam veterans from a Vietnam veteran. Now, here's your host, Mac Payne.
This is Mac Payne here with episode 1848 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. News about the Vietnam War and the brave veterans who served there, as told to you by yours truly, a Vietnam veteran. In this episode, I'm going to share a story with you about a Vietnam veteran who was the last man out of Vietnam. That man is Roger Frazier. He was in the U.S. Air Force, and he was on the last C-130 that departed Tan Son Nhut Air Base in 1973 as they were bringing out the last of the peacekeepers. I'm sharing this story with you for two reasons. Number one, I want to give Roger Frazier his 15 minutes of fame for the fact that he was the last man out of Vietnam. Another reason I'm sharing this story is that Roger Frazier is another outstanding representative of the great Vietnam veteran generation, one as great as any that ever heeded the call of duty from its country. When we came back from Vietnam, we were older, wiser, stronger, and better able to deal with adversities than our non-Vietnam veteran contemporaries. Roger became an attorney after he returned from Vietnam, spent his entire career in the great state of Arizona practicing law. I'll be willing to go out on a limb here and say, without any doubt, that he was an outstanding attorney in Arizona, primarily because of his seasoning process he went through over there in Southeast Asia. Our good buddy Skip Vaughn, who is the Redstone Rocket editor over there in Huntsville, Alabama, wrote a story about Roger Frazier. I'm going to share that story with you because it is so good. Skip does a good job writing about the veterans. The title of his story is Air Force Crew Member Among Last to Leave Vietnam. I took the liberty of saying Roger Frazier was the last man to leave Vietnam because, as you will hear in Skip's story, Roger and a few other Air Force personnel were supposed to get on the last C-130 flying out of Tan Son Nhut, but something happened, so Roger got off to enjoy a cigarette, waiting. Finally, he got the word they were ready to go. He hopped on that C-130, the last man to do so. That's why I'm saying Roger was the last man out of Vietnam. It's a very interesting story about what was going on back in those days in 1973 and at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. That's another reason I'm sharing this story with you. It's very interesting. Let's take a look at what Skip Vaughn had to say about this last Vietnam veteran to leave Vietnam. Dateline, Huntsville, Alabama, on September the 16th, 1970. Exactly 50 years and 1 day from this day, Roger Frazier entered the Air Force during the Vietnam War. Less than 3 years later, he was among the last Americans to leave South Vietnam. The California native initially went to Vietnam on October the 5th, 1972, and was transferred to Thailand on November the 29th, 1972. He spent about 6 weeks assigned to Vietnam. Frazier returned to Tan Son Nhut Air Base near Saigon from March the 29th through the 31st on 1973 to help retrieve the American soldiers assigned to the four-party Joint Military Commission. I worked in air transportation, air freight, the Tucson, Arizona attorney said. On his first trip to Vietnam, he helped with the vehicles used to load cargo planes. But when he returned in 1973, he helped transport soldiers back to the United States. He was among 12 Air Force enlistees, all in air transportation and logistics. He flew on a C-130 from Utapao, Thailand, to Tan Son Nhut on March the 29th, 1973. Their job was to process out the more than 800 soldiers who had served on the four-party Joint Military Commission. They were led by an Air Force Staff Sergeant. If you remember back to those days, one of the provisions of the Paris Peace Accords was there would be a four-party Joint Military Commission in South Vietnam to make sure everything went okay. Apparently, from what I understand, the only thing that Joint Military Commission did was get drunk in the Saigon bars. There was really nothing they could do. From what I understand, the inevitable occurred. Don't even want to talk about what happened with all the bar girls down there when that four-party Joint Military Commission went downtown to have some relaxation. Back to the story. I just typed up the passenger manifest to get these people out, and other people did other things, Frazier said of this mobility team. There was also a huge forklift and other equipment on board the C-130. The process took 3 calendar days. We stayed there at Tan Son Nhut 2 nights, Frazier said. On March the 30th, he was among a few airmen who decided to go out for the night. They could not leave the airbase, but they found a bar full of Canadian and Polish soldiers at Tan Son Nhut. The Polish soldiers were doing some kind of festive dance with their arms folded across their chest. Frazier sat at the bar and talked with a Vietnamese civilian, a man in his 30s or 40s. I said, "I felt like we're abandoning you," Frazier said. The man asked what he would like to take back with him from Vietnam. On a whim, Frazier replied he liked those cone straw hats. The Vietnamese call them non-law hats. In English, that means leaf hat. But every Vietnam veteran knows what we're talking about. It seemed like most everybody in Vietnam wore those cone hats. And just like Vietnamese barbershops, they were very practical. They would provide shade and cover for when it rained. Continuing with the story. On the March 31st departure day, the unit's vehicle drove through the streets and were followed by a horde of Vietnamese on motorbikes who waved at them. When the vehicle stopped, one of the men jumped off his motorbike and ran up to Frazier. It was the same man Frazier had met the previous night at the bar. He gave Frazier 2 cone straw hats as a goodbye present. Frazier still has those keepsakes in his home in Tucson. I know exactly how Roger Frazier feels about those cone hats. I have a memento from the Vietnam War. A Montagnard chief gave me a special crossbow when I spent some time with them up at Dak Siang in the Central Highlands. I got to know those mountain people pretty good, and they're wonderful people. I still treasure that crossbow to this day. Roger, I know exactly how you feel about those cone hats. That was a special thing. You are fortunate to have received them in that manner. Usually, when you were driving through a Vietnamese town and a crowd ran up, you better start shooting because more than likely they were going to toss a grenade into your vehicle. Luckily, that did not happen here. Frazier said this about the incident. When he held up the hats, I was shocked. The airmen processed out the last flight of departing soldiers. It was the end of the day and the end of their mission. About 30 minutes after the soldiers had departed, the 12-member air transportation team were the only Americans left in South Vietnam. They drove their Army vehicle to an awaiting C-130 on the runway and left it there. When we got on that plane, everyone else was gone. It was very quiet, Frazier said. The whole flight line was totally dead. It was dusk. But when they got on the plane, one of the crew members told them they could not leave because of an unresolved issue about prisoners of war. Frazier, a smoker back then, asked if he could go have a cigarette until they could depart. Frazier smoked his cigarette and took note of the eerie quietness. That was when it was just so quiet at one of the busiest airports in the world. So quiet. It was really the transition moment, he said. After the half hour or so it took him to finish his cigarette, it was time for the 7:30 p.m. departure. Some of his fellow airmen had already gotten on the plane, but when Frazier got aboard, there were no seats left. That's why I said Frazier was the last American to leave Vietnam. He was the last one to get on that C-130. Continuing, you'll probably never guess why there were no seats on that aircraft for Frazier. To his surprise, the plane was filled with Vietnamese women and children. No explanation given, he said. Frazier did some research later and speculates these were family members of soldiers assigned to the Military Assistance Command Vietnam. MACV had transferred its operations from Saigon to Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, the plane's destination. Where is Mel Jackson when you need him? Mel was in the Air Force over there during the Vietnam War, assigned to Thailand. He would know how to pronounce all these names, I'm sure. Unfortunately, Mel is over in Arcadia right now, recording another episode of his radio show, Coon Prairie Ramblers. I'll check with him later on the correct pronunciation of Nakhon Phanom, Thailand. Continuing with Skip Vaughn's story. The plane landed at Nakhon Phanom that night after a stop in Ubon and dropped off the Vietnamese civilians. But the plane had an accident while taxiing out for its departure from there, and Frazier and the air transportation crew had to stay an extra day. Next, he went through Udorn to Utapao. He served the rest of his tour in Thailand, and he returned to the United States in November of 1973. Now we switch over to his greatness as a Vietnam veteran. He left the Air Force as a staff sergeant May the 17th, 1974. Born in Gardenia, California, he graduated from Antelope Valley High School in Lancaster, California in 1970. He didn't feel ready for college, so he joined the Air Force to avoid the draft. After the Air Force, he went to a community college in Lancaster before transferring to UCLA, where he graduated in 1977 with a bachelor's in political science. The good thing about going to UCLA, he probably got to see some real good football there. Frazier attained his Juris Doctorate degree in 1988 from the University of Arizona. That means he got a law degree from University of Arizona. He passed the bar exam and became an attorney in Arizona. He practiced law 1 year in Phoenix and in Tucson ever since. He was with several law firms until about 6 years ago when he entered private practice. He does civil law. Sadly, his wife of 35 years, Darren, died 5 years ago. He has a daughter, Allegra, of Carbondale, Illinois, 2 sons, Niles of Brooklyn, New York, and Carter of Tucson, and a grandson in Tucson. Vietnam veteran Roger Frazier is 67. He enjoys hiking and reading history and fiction. He also likes to play the piano. It's been 50 years since Vietnam, and we're all older. The World War II people that we grew up with, they're pretty much gone now, Frazier said. It was a weird time compared to the way things are now. It was just weird in all kinds of ways. That's the story of Vietnam veteran Roger Frazier, and now you understand why he is a tremendous representative of that generation. Skip Vaughn of the Redstone Rocket, who wrote this story, added this editor's note. This is the 287th in a series of articles about Vietnam veterans as the United States commemorates the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. Skip Vaughn, you're doing a great job. Keep up the good work. I'm taking this occasion to do something different. I am hereby issuing 2 Vietnam Veteran News podcast salute. One to Roger Frazier, who was the last American out of Vietnam in 1973, and another to Skip Vaughn for writing such a great story about this great representative of the Vietnam veteran generation. Thank you both very much. I wish you the best. That's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. This is Mac Payne closing out episode 1848 of the Vietnam Veteran News Podcast. Thank you so much for coming to listen to these presentations. You are cordially invited to return again soon and often to listen to more coming your way on this podcast, the Vietnam Veteran News.
How about that? Ain't that a mess?